I have to get some coffee first.
Go ahead. Very good lighting.
Wo bist du? Zu Hause. Bist du auch gegangen?
Wird schon recorded, gell?
Oh.
Just saying.
Jetzt these personal conversations, you know. Okay, let's see. I'm not able to. That is not coming.
Yeah, I think it's only 3. I mean,
yeah, but I expect Carmel to come. Let's see. Fantastisch. See. Hi, Martin.
hello.
Hello.
Still not sure if Camel will check in or not.
Yeah, he's not on the agenda. He did open an issue.
Yeah. Was expecting him.
Yeah.
Classic open source, right?
Open
Don't
issue.
need to worry
then.
about opening an issue.
Yeah. So thanks a lot
Also-
for that
Yep.
like detailed doc you wrote, Pascal. That's great
Yeah, we can.
for the
I think
field
we can-
selection.
Yeah, we can just walk through it and then have a discussion about it, so you don't have to like read it.
I think I read most of it and thought about it a little bit.
Yeah, I went really down the rabbit hole. I thought like I would quickly write this documentation, and then it kept going and going, and I was oh, there's so many cases to cover.
Yep.
Yeah, that's also well, I'll explain. That's also the reason why I end up with the solution 3, because there's so much to cover. Why not use a system that we already knows covers everything by design, right? Anyway, we'll see.
Yep.
Let's give it 2 more minutes. Also, Shane, he opened a couple of test cases.
The crazy ones.
But it's good. Like it's really good to
Yep.
have cases like this because
Yeah, we also had a lengthy discussion yesterday about internal and how this should influence lookup and stuff like this.
Yeah, that's what Camille opened an issue about.
yeah.
Yeah. I actually I left a comment on there, just a weird thought maybe, but one that occurred to me when I read the issue.
Okay. With a couple of more minutes.
Yeah. I think Derek has also joined us.
Yeah. We also talked about this. I had a coffee chat yesterday with Kamil. We also talked about this. Also, like we discussed. That's why it actually would good if he's also here.
Yeah.
Because there were a wide range of options that you have, like introducing public, introducing leaving inaccessible in, but inaccessible means something different than internal.
We had such every time we talk about the whole stuff, it always gets really heated because everyone has really good ideas. They conflict each other. So always a lot of fun.
Yeah, the worry I have if we retain both, but like we should discuss it in more detail, is that for the user who has to decide on which one to use, becomes quite complex to understand what the differences are.
Yeah, the thing is, we had the same discussion with Fusion a year ago, right? We had private, and we were talking, or we had internal, and we were thinking about doing.
We had internal and private, yeah.
Yeah, and now we have internal, we have private, we have inaccessible. Now I know what all of this means in one, if there's only one, right? But if there's 3 of them, then I don't know what the difference is when I just read them. You know, if I read private, I know, well, it's private, whatever that means in this context. But if I'm private and inaccessible, I have no idea which one now is what, or at least my brain wouldn't be capable to remember which one is which, and then always.
I don't think we need a distinction between the strong semantics you get from inaccessible. Like someone marks a field as inaccessible, and that means that like anyone else also exposing that field cannot make it accessible. Like it's a very strong sense of marking a field as inaccessible. But that conflicts with the Finder usage, which is basically just saying it's for internal usage.
And you need that, right? We also discussed that because like what you basically did with the entities field is introducing all these finders, but they are internal. But if you have,
now the next thing, they actually are patch resolvers. You don't, it makes sense in the subgraph that you find the entity over this ID, but in the overall thing is, it's not, the entities field doesn't resolve an entity. The resolver sits on one of the subgraphs. So we
Yeah,
have
the
really
entities field
simple-
is never exposed to the supergraph, to the
Yeah, and it's
API.
also never used in isolation. For example, when you have user by ID on one subgraph, and you have subgraph A, subgraph B, you have users and reviews, and you have user
Yeah.
by ID on the user subgraph, and reviews just adds the reviews onto the user. When you fetch a user by ID, you will always hit the first subgraph to
Yeah.
get the keys to then pass into the entities field of the second subgraph. And this is exactly the use case that's without internal on lookup, it's really hard to do. Because if you just fetch by ID and you have two user by IDs, well, the execution now just decides on which way to go. And the best thing would be to just fetch it on the review subgraph. But then all the users exist suddenly, or yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's discuss that when Kamil is also here, because like he has also vested interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, and okay, I think nobody else is joining, so let's start. We still have like the proposal or the work Pascal has done on the syntax that we can use in things like requires. Before we start, let me remind you that by being here, we all agree to the GraphQL spec membership agreement. And if you need a refresher, you can look it up on the working group repository where it's linked. And with that, we can go. Let's quickly do a round of introduction for the later watcher in the future. So I'm Michael Stipe. I'm the host today.
I'm Martin. I'm with Apollo.
I'm Pascal. I'm with Chili Cream.
I'm Derek from Apollo.
Nice.
Yeah, it always feels weird because we all know each other, but it's just meant for the future watcher. And with that, we have one topic on the agenda, and that is the syntax, which we want to settle on for building out the directives like requires. And Pascal has done some work, so maybe Pascal can walk us through
Yes.
explorations.
Let me share the screen. So, do you see something?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so the motivation behind this RFC is that we have scalar. Is it big enough? Should I make it a bit bigger?
I can read it, but I think we might need the space for the tables later on.
Yeah, we do. We do. But now I can always zoom out, right? So the motivation is that we have a scalar called field selection, and this scalar is used in is, but is also used in requires. All the examples
require singular, right?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. And it's typo. And in this example, in this RFC, I only treat is because Kamil said that he will add a few examples for require later on. But essentially, I think we're pretty much covered anyway, most of the use cases with is already. Now, what you have to do is you have to, with is, you express semantic equivalence between an argument or between an argument and an object field, or between an input field and an object field. Now, when you start doing this, there's many cases that we have to cover because this is the simplest case when you just have one ID, one field that you want to map to an argument. As soon as you get more complicated, you run into a lot of different issues because theoretically you can also define is as a key, as a set of composite keys, or as a set of field, which then is a composite key. And then you have an input type here. Now, here's many, in this RFC, there's many examples. We can just go through them quickly. I will not do it here. I will do it in the example section at the end, because there's many. And there's three different approaches to solve the problem, right? Maybe I'll show two of them quickly, then we can go into the complicated cases later. Simplest cases, you want to express semantic equivalence between this ID argument and this user type, this user ID field. A more complex case is when you have fields which are nested deeper in the tree. So you want to express semantic equivalence between this ID and this field, the address field. And the more you go into the complex cases, you probably also will have composite keys, where you have in the simplest scenarios just a match of the names of the user. So the user fields match the user input fields that we see here. And when we go into more difficult cases, the names could be different. Then we have to somehow remap them. The structure could be different, so that maybe the user has a profile and we actually want to map this for, oh, that was not what I wanted to do. We want to match this first name with this first name of the user input type. And there's many, many more of these complications. Now,
yeah,
there is
especially the type conditions that complicates things a lot.
Yes, yes. The one thing if you take this to the maximum level of complexity I've found so far, it's when you have a different structure in the input type and a different structure in the output type, and you also use unions or interfaces, so abstract types, in the output type. This gets really, really confusing because it could be what we want to do in this example is we want to map the first name. This is an input, by the way, sorry. We want to map the first name in the user input field info to either first name of the enter profile ID or the ADFS profile ID field name. And it's doable, but it's really complicated to do.
Yeah.
Now, going to the solution, what we did in Fusion initially was we had just a selection set. And what the selection set does really well is it also is able to deal easily with abstract types. What is more difficult, or what adds ambiguity, is as soon as you select into nested fields, it's no longer clear if you just want to point to address ID, or if you want to select the whole thing and say, this is an address with the field ID. So that's the ambiguity that you get here. Especially here with multiple field references, it becomes completely unclear what you actually mean. And we could introduce an input annotation like syntax, where you basically have aliases here. But then again, that's already something which is not a normal selection set. It's already some kind of mix between input and selection set. Now, you mentioned initially that actually you mentioned it that you are interested into path, and we've done it before with the old stitching stuff that we have in Hot Chocolate. And with path, when you have a path with dot syntax, the easiest thing that you can do is looks exactly the same like a selection set. So you match by name, you match by same names, multiple field. But when you drill in, it becomes clear what you mean. You actually want to say that user ID is the address.id, which makes it really clear.
For these simple cases, I think it's a really good syntax.
Yes, it makes it really clear. On the I would say con side, it's not really known in GraphQL. It's something that's really new. It's not a selection set. It's something, the dot syntax is something that we only know from coordinates, and that didn't even make it into the spec yet.
But it's fairly intuitive. I think it's pretty easy to understand.
People will understand it.
For the simple cases, when we go in more complex cases, like where you maybe have address is not a single object, but is an abstract, and then you have to kind of say from which possible types you want to get something. That's where it.
Well,
I have examples for this as well. I don't have lists because lists is anyway something we have to think about carefully. But if you have multiple selections, it's also easy. You can say you want to map profile first name, last name. As soon as you go into renaming stuff, so you want to say that the input field first name matches the profile.name, This is also really intuitive for people to understand. And
Yeah.
now where the path syntax has issues is as soon as you introduce these abstract types. Because even in this case, this is kind of is easy if you have this, if we add this generic syntax, again, something that we never had before in GraphQL. When you have this generic syntax, it makes it accessible a bit. But there's one problem. It could be that you end up with this, where you have to match two different fields of two different types, and then you need another thing, which is this kind of union operator in between to say which fields selection that you actually need.
Yeah.
You could also introduce something like of type and then generic in there to make it a bit more readable.
Okay, can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so instead of like profile, entra profile, we could have profile dot of type and then generic behind that. Kind of like a function to select that. To make it more clear what the generic there means, right? This is you want to have profile of type entra, yeah, like something like this.
Something like that.
And then the example down there was just movie would also make more sense. Kind, I don't know.
Yeah, I think another thing to consider that complicates this even further, but I think that's true for both syntaxes, is that the mapping has to be exhaustive. Like if we only specify a mapping for the like enter profile, for instance, and we don't have a mapping for what was the other one?
It's ADFS and entra.
Or,
it's a bad example, but it's something I just ran into the other day. So
okay, yeah. Well, maybe move your book would be easier.
Yeah.
So we specify mapping for like movie or book here, but what if someone adds another member to that union, or what if someone adds another implementing type to an interface?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, if you think about it, it shouldn't be a problem, because the lookup would just not look it up. In a case of an interface, you can always map the interface ID. But in case of a union, it would be one subgraph that adds this, and the other subgraph doesn't know about this union implementation anyway. So it's not bad that that you do not have it in this selection set, right?
That's a good point.
It's just not fetchable. It's not a lookup for this ID type.
Yeah, so it only has to be exhaustive locally, which is still something we'd need to check, but it does make things easier. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even have to be exhaustive locally, right? Theoretically, I'm not saying that it could be a rule, but it wouldn't have to be exhaustive, because let's say that here the ADFS profile exists as well on this subgraph, then it could be that there might just not, this finder method, this finder field is just not a lookup for the ADFS profile, because you know the types, right? With you already expect to have the type in the gateway, because you take the field, you take the data and you put it inside of this field. So before you call this field, you know if you have an ADFS profile or an entra profile. And
well,
then
none of it comes from the client, right? Not if the client invokes the finder.
Yes, true. But I guess that behavior is anyway not defined. I mean, the client doesn't have any, the client doesn't know about is anyway.
No, but it has to follow the contract, right? The finder has to follow the contract. Like if you.
Yes, but you are also limited by the input that you have there, right?
Yeah.
So if the input doesn't even specify this other case, like there is no place to fetch that, because like you have a very this is not any, right? The user input is very strict in what it can do. So it must be exhaustive against this input in what it can do.
Yeah, on this input and also on this output, right?
Yes.
So
I mean, theoretically, I don't know why this shouldn't be. I think there could be 3 subgraphs which have movies or books, but maybe the finder just works for one type. I mean, it's edge case anyway. Let's not lose too much time with it, because there's a third option, which tries to make it it's not a formal specification yet. I will do a formal specification if we want to explore this more, because then we can actually see if it works. But the third approach basically takes the benefits of both of these approaches. So what we've seen with the path approach is really easy to point to a field, but it's really hard to do abstract types. What we've seen with the selection set syntax, it's really easy to do these abstract selections, but it becomes ambiguous what you actually want to do with the selection set. So this third...
Yeah, I by the way, like the OR syntax there, but like it doesn't work out when you have that in a nested field, right? Like this is not nested here. If we had the same, if we wanted to do the same thing on a nested expression, this would become difficult.
You could still do it, but it would look so it would be like still a path thing, right?
Yeah,
you would have to remove the spaces, but it's kind of ugly.
Yeah,
or like if
I'm just
type,
yeah, it's getting more complex, I think.
It's possible to do it nested, because
but it's really nice for these little things.
with the path, you always point to one field. That's the rule with the path. You point to one field, and you can make any structure that you want with this, because you point to only one field.
Now, I was also spitballing with Pascal a bit to do like 2 syntaxes for the easy cases and for the more complex cases, but
yeah,
I like we have to have a look at them. But yeah, go on, Pascal. Sorry.
So the last example here combines these two, and there's a bit of a formal specification of how this works, but it's not so formal. The idea is that field selection is like the object value is a list, is a collection of selections and input fields. The input field being this, and a selection being this. So this is a field from the output type, right? And this is a field from the input type. So this is an input field, and this is an output field. And then when we go up, we also have in the selections, this is also a selection, because it selects profile, and in profile it selects first name. So this is one selection on the output type.
I think what I find confusing with the sort of selection set syntax here is that it doesn't preclude you from selecting multiple fields. Like I could put like first name and middle name within profile, and then semantically it wouldn't make sense.
So that's what I was saying. So like the field selection, so there's 2 use cases, right? So I personally like that field selection would have to resolve to a single field somewhere. We have a field set for the keys, which is like a number of fields, right? But if a field selection always has the constraint that it resolves to a single one, it works. It's very simple, right? You always have single arguments, right? It's problematic with the objects, right? So if you have the input objects, then the question is, maybe you would just annotate input object fields there with the is to have the equivalence to something else. but it's I really like that one-to-one mapping that like the require, like if I have a single argument, it just makes it very easy to map to it.
Yeah.
Like once
And
you,
you
once
had-
you
and-
get
and
multiple
you-
selections, it gets very messy very fast.
Yeah, and you can restrict it like during validation, but it's really nice if it's sort of correct by construction, if there's no way to express that ambiguity in the syntax.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's also constraints we have to think about. There's a lot of mapping logic at the moment in here, right? The constraints we have to think about is how much mapping logic do we need between the inputs and the syntax.
yeah. So
So
let me. I have a lot of cases with all the examples that we can go through in a second, and then you can make up your mind.
Let me say one more thing, because I do really like the sort of equivalence between this and the input object literals, because that makes it really clear sort of what the braces mean in this syntax. Like we're constructing an object, we're not using selection set syntax.
Yes, that's something that you anyway in both cases. You have the reason why this problem is so complicated is at its core very simple. The reason why it's so complicated is because you map output fields to an input object structure. And there you have the collision of two worlds, because GraphQL was not designed to do this. GraphQL was designed to have a query language for objects and have an input defined input syntax for inputs, but not that you use the same together. That's not what it's designed. So this approach basically says, by default, it's a selection. But you can opt into an input object by defining an input field. The selection means you always only ever select one field. Only one field. You never select more than one field. There is no aliases, there is no arguments, there is no directives. A selection is inherently an input field if you do not prefix it with a name. So if it's not a child of an input field, so if it's not like first name, last name, it's just last name, last name. So this would be last name is the same as, right?
Yeah.
Good. So now an input field is a key value pair, as you know, field name value. Now, if you start the value with a curly bracket, it's an input object, and you're in object value, the same as in an input. And the only way to get out of it is to define a selection. And it's really easy, conceptually, because if you follow this rule, you can do anything with it. Now, simple selection looks simple, more complex selection look complex, look also simple. You have first name, You have first name and you have last name, which is two selections in this field selection. And when you go in the more complicated cases, you see that you have an input field with a selection, and then you have another input field with a selection. So also simple cases to remap is easy. It supports easily abstract types. And you can also drill into properties like profile first name because you have an input field and then you have a selection.
So I think what this illustrates to me is like why is selection a why does that support standard GraphQL selection syntax, and is it not a path? Like if this was like profile dot first name,
because you can do this.
Sure, but I think that's sort of the issue we were talking about before with the need for like the angle brackets or some other syntax that you can use inline.
Yeah. I'm not saying that this is the holy grail. I'm just saying that with this you use standard GraphQL concepts, and you make.
But it's but I think the problem is that it's standard GraphQL concepts, but they mean something entirely different. Because if you were using like profile braces something in a GraphQL selection set, you'd get back profile as a top level field with name nested in it. So I think that's confusing because the semantics are very different, and the path syntax makes it clear that you're selecting the value of a like nested path.
Yeah, true. I mean, it's either learning a new syntax or learning new semantics. It's one of the two. And we have to figure out which is better. Because as said, you can do exactly the same thing. We'll see. Look, we have a lot of examples here. When we go to the more complex, because the simple examples you see is different anyway. Here with the drill, when you drill in, it's the path syntax definitely the one which is the easiest to understand. When you start doing more complex selections, then this is really easy to understand, but it's a new concept because of the generics. And
the question is also a bit about, and I mean, Kamil is looking that up in Hive, but it would also be good to have kind of a feeling what it's on the Apollo side. Like, how often do we have these complex keys? Like because it's a bit about, like, the dot syntax is really good if it's simple, right? So if most cases are simple, then it's okay if in some rare cases the syntax looks a bit awkward, but we still can do it with the dot syntax. But if the complex cases are what users do a lot, then we need something more complex than the dot syntax. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it might be interesting to look through the schemas we have access to and see if there's statistics about that. I mean, it's also not just a matter of like a single key or an input object, because you can also use multiple arguments. I think that's a fairly common.
That's true. That's very true. But I would say it breaks it down to a few. I think yes, but it's the same. Because multiple arguments is just another input object.
No. But with multiple arguments, you would use two is directives. You would use one per argument. So you don't need the simple mapping per.
Yeah, but two arguments is the same thing as an input object, conceptually.
Well, so here's the thing, right? So if you use, to me as an end user, when you have is and you have a field and you actually have multiple field selection over there, that is already confusing, right? So field implies a single field, but we're selecting multiple ones there. So for like the regular arguments, like the scalars, yeah, it's simple, right? For the input objects, I think that is probably the point of contention, right? How we actually do that. And I was wondering whether we could have that is applicable on fields of input object to map it, but then there's also limiting that you have input object onto a different things, potentially depending on the path that you take, right? It can apply to different things because it has different set of errors, so you probably do want to have it by query, but it's kind of a.
We also talked about.
We've been there, and beautiful syntax, and then we're like, oh. That doesn't work.
The problem is the problem for that is if you reuse the input object in two find a kind of
paths and different object potentially
things,
right?
And to your first point, I think the field argument being confusing for input objects. One option might be to rename field. Like we were actually trying to find a different argument name last time we talked. Something like selection might be more neutral, but that complicates the simple case, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe there's
something simpler we can find.
Maybe there are two arguments. There's a field for one and then selection for multiple, and you specify one or another, but it's like they're both optional. So it's
we also have the solution for it, but you guys will not like it. Because there is the solution. Watch out.
What is a?
It's a first
name. No,
Yeah.
no, but to be like what we could also do is have both syntaxes. That's something that could also be
I wouldn't go there.
be something when
I-
you say okay, like the simple cases, but
I would say
like yeah, go ahead, Pascal.
if we have path, if we go the path route, then I believe we should commit. Because I will show you really complex cases where you really have to reshape an input object. Because I agree in this case, it's very easy. And what I do agree, I really do like is if this is a simple argument, then this makes a lot of sense. And this is really complicated. But if you look at this makes sense. It's either an ID or the ID of a different type. Now, when we go to the really complex cases here, where the selection set syntax doesn't even have a solution for it, you see that we start reshaping and we just write an input object. We just write an input object and then we select the fields.
Yeah.
We have to be really careful how much reshaping we want to have. Like what are the limits we want to allow there?
Yeah. And these two syntaxes are equivalent, meaning with capabilities. Both sides can do the same thing. As far as I've I've seen.
So the one argument for the third one, though, is that it is a selection set. So technically, if you have a logic to validate that you have a valid selection set, you already have a parser that understands that.
But it's not really a selection set. It already has additional syntax, and the semantics are very different.
Is it?
Yes,
Because
but
it just
the
adds aliases, right? So it adds aliases to a field, so it's still a valid GraphQL.
No, but it also adds aliases to a structure, to an object structure, like the info colon braces. That would not be valid selection set syntax.
True, but the thing is to get to this parser is a lot easier than to do the other parser. I'm not saying that it's difficult to implement the first parser, but like if you have a GraphQL parser, it's very easy to do a couple of modifications and you have the selection set style.
I think that's actually confusing because we don't want the full selection set syntax. Like we don't want directives. We don't want.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but
that is called the field set that we have in Federation, right? Because that is selection set minus the braces, minus the directives, minus the arguments.
I was
and minus aliases, yeah.
I was there. I was about to say that it's here. It's a field set, but then I realized that we haven't specified what a field set exactly is.
We have to do that too. It's also on the agenda. So no.
Yeah. Yeah. One other crazy idea, like if we really take the sort of object literal construction to its logical conclusion, maybe even the case here where you map the user input to first name, last name, maybe you would force users to use braces there to sort of construct the user input.
We looked at JavaScript actually at the original object spreading and stuff like that when we explored, because it's kind of you're kind of constructing an input object, right?
Yeah,
and you kind of want to tell how do we take from an output result and how do we construct from that an input. That is the
there's one big yes to your question, Martin, but it also hurts because there's one case which isn't solvable with any of the approaches that we showed without introducing ambiguity. And the curly brackets for input object would solve the case, but it's so ugly when you always have to add these curly brackets, right? But
I don't know if it's ugly because it makes it very explicit what you're doing.
Yeah,
and
look,
constructing an input object, I think that is different from just mapping a field.
Multiple field references. Where are the edge cases? Actually, where's the edge case? So there's this case.
Yeah.
And this case is hard. Because what does this mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Is it,
But actually, with
Okay.
constructing with having the braces there, like
You
if you
would-
want to construct an object, you have to do the braces.
You would solve it, yes. But the question is, what do you have to specify the braces, or do you have to specify the input object?
What do you mean?
Well, if you specify an input, like let's say
Just type an example.
yeah, here, let's just take this, right? If you have this, now is it this,
That's what I was thinking, but
or
what was your...
does it have to be this?
No, I think we could use the same shortcut that like JavaScript.
Yeah, it's
object
also in
literals.
C#.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the same in C# also.
Yeah.
Like
But conceptually, you do always have like an input field name. I think that's nice.
And with that actually, so we experimented yesterday with it, but we shied away from it. With that, you can also use kind of the real spread operator when it goes to abstract types, and you kind of fill up the fields with data.
How would that work? Do you have an example of that?
It doesn't in some cases. It does work very, very, very nice in one case.
Yeah, it fell apart in some ways. You're right.
So if you do this, right, and now look at it go. It's so nice. You say on movie, right? You say ID.
On movie, no? Yeah. You forgot that one, but
right. And now, if it's a movie, then there's an ID. But if it's not a movie, if it is, oh, that was wrong. If it is a book, then it's this ID, or it's the book ID. Anyway, it's really doesn't really work. We played around with so many ideas.
I mean, we can explore this a bit further.
I think we need to, yeah.
At this alternative maybe to there. Like we have now a couple of cases. Like we could add a more object construction syntax. What do you think, Pascal?
I think that what's more important, we have to decide what's more important. Is it more important to match, to resemble the key, or is it more important to resemble the input object in this case? Because the key you compute, you just take, it doesn't matter what you do, but when you go down here with this example, these two things, which you actually see it a bit nicer here, these two are the same. One uses path and one uses the selection set syntax.
Yeah.
Both construct an object. Now, if you have a look at how it what it constructs, right? It constructs the object. Let's call it JSON. It constructs this object, where name is whatever, and first name is something.
Yeah.
And this is the input. This is the input of this field. But it also constructs a selection. And the selection that it constructs is this. It's the selection that we have here. And we can just merge it, and then we have the key, right? This is the selection that we construct, the graphical selection.
No, but you can't merge it, because profile here, like if this were a normal selection set, you'd get back like things nested under profile.
Yes,
yeah,
but
there's no lift, and the dots into yeah. So I get
the key. The key set that you have. This is a key set, and it is a key set. It always is, because you need a key to look up an entity.
Yeah, but this, like, the this is something that the dot syntax actually can do, what we cannot do with the selection syntax. I haven't thought about that. That's a good argument, because with the dot syntax, you actually express a lift. So
You do
I'm
the same-
lifting
You
this.
do the same thing.
Yeah, but this is not like when you from a GraphQL standpoint, you cannot lift with this syntax. It will always become a structure. You
Yes,
know
but
what?
you also don't. You never. You do the same. You lift here. You lift from first name of enter profile to first name of the input.
Yeah, but even you could go deeper, right? You could go to profile, enter profile dot foo dot bar dot first name.
I can do the same thing here. I just do foo bar.
Yeah, but that is like, what's the difference? Like mapping this structure one-to-one on an object and lifting it.
The thing is that what I say is that this enter profile, it's still the key of the entity. When somewhere, if this finder is ever invoked, there is a subgraph somewhere that has type user, and the key of the user is this selection set. It's
Yes.
this key set. There's always an entity that has this key set. Right? It's a key set because you need it. Otherwise, you don't need the lookup.
Yeah, but still, I don't get how we get, like, I think what would be cool is kind of a mix between the dot syntax and an object construction syntax.
Then we can do this. Then we go the pathway. It's fine. Both are similarly capable.
Yeah, but do you know what I mean, right? You have the kind of like in JavaScript for the object construction, the syntax, and you can then point to the result type with the dot syntax.
Yeah, and I think one of the benefits of that is that braces are not ambiguous because they always represent construction and never
Yes,
like selection sets.
That's one big yes for the path is that the braces have two different semantic meanings depending on where they are. On one side, it's the indication that it's an object value. Of the other side, it's the indication that it's selection set starts. Yeah. It's really bad.
Yeah, and it's even ambiguous depending on the context, because you can construct a nested input object, but you can also go into a selection set.
It's not if you follow that you can only ever select one field with the selection. If you follow this concept, it's never.
Oh yeah,
but
then you have to disambiguate based on that.
It's the same thing as the path. It's just a different syntax for the same path.
Yeah, what I just really reflected on in this discussion now is like we would teach people how to use GraphQL syntax to do a completely different thing like they ever did. Like, because in GraphQL there's no lifting with its syntax, and there's also no object construction with that. And I think this would introduce too many false friends where people think, oh, I can do this, but then it on build it just doesn't work. And if we go into something new that kind of borrows some things from JavaScript object construction and the dot syntax, like the dot syntax is really nice for lifting things. It's very clear what it does. So I'm grabbing in here and pulling out the data.
And we have easy rules. We always take the inherently the last field. Inherently, the last field of the path is the name of the input field.
Yeah.
Yeah, or you force people to be explicit if you really want to avoid ambiguity.
Yeah, I think for the single case where you have the scalar, then you can just have the dot syntax. But as soon as you have an object, you have to construct.
Yeah,
I agree. That makes sense. Anyway, I just want to raise this point, because this is this was a big yay moment for me, right? You can merge them, and they have to be a key set. Even if you do complex selections like this, where we have profile and we have name, right?
Yeah.
If you do complex ones of these, and we have, for example, this, where we have, I don't know, let's remove this. Or let's just take, this is always the name of the Entra profile. Like this. Might make sense, doesn't, might not. Now the key, if you take these and translate them to selections, because the syntax are equivalent, you can do the same thing with selections. And then you merge the selections, you get the key. Because this will just be name. And this has to be a key set somewhere in one of the subgraphs. Otherwise, you have a lookup that will never work.
Yeah, so I get what you mean. So from the is directives, you can compile a key set, and that's also how we can validate that the key on the object is correct.
Yeah.
Yes, and the key set will always match, because there's no alias, there's no arguments, there's no directive. It has to match. Makes it really easy for us to formalize it, right? Because we can just say it has to be the same, and then easy.
Yeah.
Okay, but so the document was really helpful, really, to also see we have to do a bit more, but I think the idea we had last is something good. We should add it and then look at it next week again. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that sounds good.
I will
Yeah.
add another section to this document and make it. I want to somehow keep this, not because I'm proud of it, but I'm sure when we now remove it, then we make the same mistake.
No, just add it. Just add it, Pascal.
I will archive it below, because I will start clean with the path, because I have the feeling that we go into direction of path. And the more that we start formalizing it, the more we will see what works and what doesn't.
Okay.
And if someone wants to have to make a point in some different syntax, we can always go back and see it here. But I don't want to formalize multiple approaches if we agree on the path syntax. Because the only thing I see which is not good in the path syntax is that we have to introduce three concepts that have not existed in GraphQL before. But I also agree that it's clearer for users that have never seen GraphQL.
So in the RFC, right? So we're talking about that's talking about motivation, what the is, right? So this is to map the arguments to something, right? I think it's based on this discussion, what we were just discussing last, I think it would make sense also to describe the relationship to the keys, how we're actually looking at it as, because I think that will actually add extra background to folks, the consideration of what this is actually trying to achieve.
It depends a bit on how we were looking at things in this discussion, but I think what we can say now quite clearly, and will also really influence what the field name is called, the argument name is called in is, and also what the scalar name is called, because what we have is we actually map input objects.
Mm-hmm.
We always map somehow input objects.
It might help to also look at the require case.
Yes.
Because I think we want the same name for both, and it has to make sense.
Yes. Yeah, it should be the same name. But I think on the directive thing, we can we don't have to decide on the name in this specification. More like if we come up with a good syntax that works, it's the same case essentially, right? If we come up with the syntax and we say, okay, this is it, then we can go on to the directives.
Yeah. One other thing to call out, maybe, like someone at Apollo, of who I showed this to brought this up, but the bar, like the or, we may need to specify that ordering matters, that we're trying alternatives in order, because there might be overlap. Like if the type conditions are both abstract types and
Yes.
a certain like possible type implements both, for instance.
Yeah.
That's one big yes for the path and one big fat no for the selections. Because in the selections, you wouldn't be able to do this. In the selections, you would merge it.
Yeah, you would do the graphical.
Oh, no.
And then both matches would, like the selection set syntax is that in field merging, actually both cases that are valid would be merged into one selection, right? That is how the field set merging algorithm in GraphQL works.
Yeah, that's something that
Where with the or, it's very clear you take one of them. Like in the case you have like Entra profile is an interface, which also matches, and then ADFS profile is a concrete type or another interface, and both are valid. Then in the selection set, you would have to do a field merging.
One thing
Both would then be true.
One thing is that this makes things now really, really complicated, because is this really a case that's even representable in this? Let's say we have a profile, and Entra profile is a profile, or we have a cloud profile, and Entra profile is a cloud profile, right? ADFS is an on-premise profile. Now we say that this would be, I don't know, zone name. Now you have different.
How do you do like this also you do? But this should be okay, Pascal, with the construction syntax, which is missing at the moment.
Yeah, it is, but
let's first, because it becomes confusing. Let's first come up with a syntax. Let's rework the syntax, and then go into it.
I need to see if I found a good example of this.
Yeah, and it might require might be a better context for that. It's not just about the key mapping. It could also.
Yeah, let's see. Good point. Now I have to go down the same rabbit hole again. Well, at least I have now a good point. I was thinking by the path syntax, by the way, if we should indicate that the path starts somehow, but it also somehow didn't look right. So one thing is that the benefit with the starting the path is that you know that the path starts.
Yep. But is it ever ambiguous?
It's not, but it's easier to read. You mean it would have to be an object, it would have to be a curly bracket here to not be a path.
Yeah.
So, yes. It's not ambiguous. It's not. It would just be a lot easier, but I agree. Doesn't have to.
This is great, by the way. I'm really glad you went down this rabbit hole and wrote this whole.
Yeah, otherwise you don't see, like, to just talk about it, you don't see the edge cases, right?
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It won't be the last time that we have to do this in this working group.
No. It would be great to get Camille's input as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I will
And
send him the recording and then he has to watch it.
yeah.
Okay, awesome. Time is
Yeah.
up.
Thank you so much.
Like next week we look at it again,
Yeah, we will.
and also at internal and inaccessible, private, or whatever comes to mind in this regard.
Yeah. All right.
Great talking, guys. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yep.